Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of This is Leadership, your intersection between growth and leadership. And today, folks, I have a good friend of mine as a guest today, and I'm so happy that Chris is here to speak with us. We're going to be talking about his book, but let me tell you a little bit more about Chris before we get things started. So, Dr. Chris Jones has been an educator in Massachusetts for 22 years. His experience in the classroom ranged from 8th to 11th grade, working in an urban setting. Chris is passionate about continuous improvement and the idea that success is not a destination. And for those of you who didn't know, Chris was named the 2022 Massachusetts School Counselors Association Administrator of the Year. So congratulations, Chris, on that. And the last thing I'm going to say, Chris, is you're an author as well, because we are going to be talking about your book, which is right here. Those of you watching us on YouTube, Seeing to Lead, Support, Engage, and Empower. We're going to be getting into this beauty here today. So, Chris, thanks for being here with me on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Every time I talk to you, I find that I'm learning something new. So I really appreciate you giving me some time.
And that's right back at you. I had the opportunity to be on your podcast as well and had a great time. And it's funny, we're both principals. We both have podcasts. So we share that passion, but I think you'll agree with me that, when it does come to podcasting, we get as much out of it, if not more than probably our guests. So it's great to have you here, Chris. And it's great to be talking about the book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love the way you structured the book. I love the way you brought in, you brought us some of your stories, especially when you were back in elementary school. I really enjoyed that, and how we'll get into it. I don't want to spoil it right now, now for everybody that's listening or watching on YouTube. So listen, Chris, I talked a little bit about your professional background, but how about you tell us a little about yourself, your family, and what's going on in your life right now, Chris?
Sure. My life right now is a little busy with the opening of school, as you understand, because you're principal. But I am married to a fantastic woman and one of the best teachers I've ever seen. She's also a teacher. She teaches 7th and 8th grade English.
Okay.
So I'm married to my wonderful wife, Mary, who I'll throw this out there for everybody. I call her Bella. Is her nickname, because it means beautiful in Italian, and she's Italian and she's beautiful. So, but I also have two sons. I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old boy. And they are just the highlight of my life right now. As they were growing up, they always say, "Oh, this is the best age." I found myself saying that every single time they turn another age. It's like, "Oh, this is the best age." Right now, as they get older, I'm off doing their different things with them. They both wrestle. So I'm in the gym with both of them lifting. I've got one that is an engineer. He loves creating things and then putting those into a computer and then having the computer do the work. My youngest son loves creating things, but loves doing them with his hands, which is the picture behind me.
That's awesome.
He wants to be a blacksmith, so I'm helping him get those opportunities to do that. But so my life now is doing the best I can in the school for the teachers that I serve and the students that I serve, continually building that culture and working on that culture. I'm going and doing some different presentations. I actually have one tomorrow on the book and on supporting, engaging, and empowering teachers. So I'm keeping busy. Not a whole lot of downtime. But
I hear you. I hear you. And for those that aren't watching this on YouTube, well, the picture behind Chris is actually his son with what is it, a 3-pound hammer?
Yeah, he's got
you told me.
Yeah, it's a 3-pound hammer on a piece of red hot steel, and he's banging it on an anvil. And that anvil, it was like a history lesson, which then I kind of nerd out. But the anvil is 200 years old, and it's a 300-pound cast anvil.
Wow.
And it was just on this big tree trunk that had been cut and placed there. So yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And we were talking before the recording how I thought, because your one son is 13 and your second one is younger, right? You had said, or is he older?
He's older. He's 2 years older. He's 15.
That's right. So, and just thinking about it, I'm thinking about even my kids when they were 13, they were playing with friends, they were playing sports and whatnot. And I was saying how it's not often we'll see, 13-year-olds, for example, for your son with that has the picture behind you, to dive into what they're passionate about and already thinking about, hey, you know what, maybe this is something that I like to do further on. So I think it's great, and you'll have to congratulate him for me, because to be forward thinking like that, I think is a blessing, and I think that it just shows, the great work I think that you're doing as parents, who are the first educators of our child, right? It's us, it's the parents. And to be seeing him actually engaging in that and exploring that, I think is fantastic.
I will definitely deliver that message from Canada that, that he's got a fan.
Directly from North Bay, Ontario, Canada. 3.5 hours north of Toronto, for those that don't know that. So just thought I'd put that in there. So listen, Chris, you are, we mentioned the fact that you were named the 2022 Massachusetts School Counselors Association Administrator of the Year. You got to be nominated for that. People got to appreciate what you're doing, and you're putting yourself out there as a leader. And I love asking this question, to leaders, that I meet, because I always find that their answers are really intriguing, and it allows me to learn as well. But when thinking about leadership, Chris, what is it that brought you to want to lead? At some point you were a classroom teacher. Did you always think that you wanted to right from the get-go? Did you think that maybe you'd never get there, and then, oh my God, you developed this passion? So, how did you get to wanting to lead?
Well, that's interesting, because and that's a great question. Education's my second career.
Okay.
Before I was an educator, I was a coppersmith.
Okay.
And when I got into education, I got into education with the idea that, and I stayed away from education because I did not have, and that's in the book as well, I didn't have the best school experience through all grade levels. It just was really a mediocre experience. It really didn't do much to engage me or empower me. And so I kind of moved off of that and went away from there. And I was giving tours to my friends and family on Civil War battlefields,
Okay.
Specifically Gettysburg. And they were like, Chris, why do you not teach? You're talking history and politics all the time. And my mother still gives me a hard time to this day, because I told her, I said, look, I went to high school. I'll teach anybody anything. But if you think that I'm going to do discipline for 90% of the time and not get to teach because of that, I don't need that in my life. I'm going to go do something else.
Don't need that stress.
Right. And my first job, I called my mother and told her, and she still doesn't let me live this down. My first job was at an alternative high school for all the kids. It was dropout prevention. So kids that were dropping out of high school for whatever reason,
Okay.
Be it behavior, be it, social emotional issues, things like that. They were all behavior issues. And so that was the crowd that I looked at, and I started teaching with them, and I never looked back after that. I fell in love with it. And as I was going through this process, I was blessed enough to be brought up by a mother and a grandfather who said, look, you don't just run your mouth about stuff. If you want to talk about something being wrong, then you do something to fix it, or keep quiet.
Yeah.
And there was something wrong with the way things were being done in schools, at least in my experience. And I'm sure there were plenty of things that were being done right and the best that we could ever see. And there were plenty of things being done worse. But my experience was that the experience altogether could be better, soup to nuts, for everybody involved, for students, for teachers. And it took me a little while to get to that part of it, my understanding, for parents, for communities. And so what I did is I first hesitated to leave the classroom, because that whole thing is, I didn't want to get too far from the students, away from the students, because then what am I doing? If we're truly going to affect students, why would I move away from them? A person moved up to a school, said, I'd really like to see you step forward and come with me and work underneath me and be a leader. So I thought about it, and I really sat down and reflected about what that meant for me, and what that meant as far as getting away from students or not getting away from students. And I really honed in, or started there. It wasn't refined yet, but the idea of my firm belief of being a teacher-centered principal, because the way I was going to affect the most students in the most positive way was to support, engage, and empower teachers. um, and focus on them, because look, no matter how many students I meet with during a day, there's no way I can impact as many as a teacher can on the
That's
ground
right.
level.
That's right.
So that all ended up culminating or fitting into my why, that it just took me time to find. It was always there. It just took me time to kind of feel it enough to be able to describe it and talk about it. And my why for years now and to this day is to make the educational experience better for all those involved
Mm,
by being purposeful, acting with integrity, and building character.
mm. Love that. Love that. And going back to when you said you were in school and actually you mentioned that it wasn't, a fully positive experience. And I know in the book you talked about that at the beginning of the book. And at one point early on in the book, you were, telling us that story. You're telling us the story. And at one point you said your perspective about teachers started to change. So I found that really interesting. So can you bring us back and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wish I could put my finger on the moment that happened. I had a chip on my shoulder. Now, I wasn't a troublemaker in school or anything like that. Um, quite the contrary, I was bored. I
Yeah.
would sit in
Yeah.
class, and what would
Yeah.
frustrate teachers is that I would sit in class, I was bored, I would do my work, and I'd get passing grades. But I wouldn't participate, I wouldn't engage or anything like that. And I just saw it as teachers going through the motions. I just saw it as teachers mailing it in, for lack of a better term, and
Yeah.
just really not doing things that would engage me. Now, it's a complete shirking of my own personal responsibility to get engaged in my education. But being the age I was, I didn't realize that. And being the age I was, I also took that out on teachers and blamed teachers for that. You're a bad teacher. You're a bad teacher. You're a
Yeah.
bad teacher.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't until later that I realized these teachers didn't want to step out of line. They didn't want to take risks. It's not that they were mailing it in. It's that they didn't have somebody behind them supporting them to get better at their craft and to make adjustments, or to even engage them in the ability to do that, or to even empower them
Mm.
to not have to think they need to fill out a form or ask permission to change up their lessons and make them different, so that
Yeah.
the students in the classroom would say, hey, yeah, I'm really interested in my education now.
Yeah. And that makes me think, I've always said it when I started teaching, the style that I brought into the classroom at first it was the same one that what I knew as a student, right? So you teach the way you were taught. And it was the same thing when I became a principal back in 2006. I would mimic a little bit of what I knew and what I thought was best practices, right? With those people, with those principals in particular. So often I find that when it comes to that, it's sometimes it's just a matter of they not the teachers not knowing what they don't know.
Yeah.
So they'll come in and they'll think that this is the way that I should be teaching in the classroom. This is the way that it was done with me when I was sitting in that desk. So I'm just going to continue doing it that way. Be it teaching more as a frontal teacher where I'm in front and I'm not really engaging with the students. You got to be sitting in rows and you can't talk and all this old school stuff. So I think it was definitely like that back in our day when we were in elementary school. Thankfully we're seeing that evolve now, but a lot of the times when teachers come out of the faculty of education and their teacher training programs, we can't assume that they're going to know these things just automatically, right? Is they need to be guided, they need to be coached, they need to be accompanied, and we need to show them that what you have a curriculum. Yeah, that is important, but what's even more important than that is that you've got human beings sitting in front of you, and that is your first responsibility, is to create those relationships with those human beings so that you can actually make sure that they're in a position to want to learn and in a position to be able to receive that learning as well, right? So the idea that they can have coming out, depending on what school, what teachers they had, often is more that cookie cutter type of way of teaching in a classroom. So I think for us it's important, and for me, going from the classroom to the principalship, it was a little bit the same thing as you, right? Like I had a blast with my kids, and I taught grade 7 and 8, and then I went off and I was a chemistry teacher in high school, and I had grade 12 students, and in my classrooms we would just have so much fun. I'd have the lab coat on. I had the big clown, those big clown plastic glasses. I used to put those on when I would teach grade 12. And I used to teach molecular theory, right? Like particle theory. And then I used to pretend that I can see the particles and describe them. I was doing this for grade 12 kids, and they thought I was wacko, right? This guy's crazy. But, some of these kids today, I received them as teachers in my school, right? And the one thing they always remember is an experience like that. So, for me, that's what it was. It was the feeling that I had when I was with my students in the classroom, the success that we knew and the growth that we both knew, both the students and myself, is what I wanted to replicate. I wanted, teachers in the school to really have that feeling as well, and to know what it feels like to connect, because that's what makes the difference, right? Is that connection. So, same thing as you, which way can I do that? In which way can I do that to have the biggest impact? Well, maybe the next step is to go to the school level and just bring that there and see how it goes.
Yeah, it's, and I'm so glad you brought up the whole idea of teacher prep programs, because
Yeah.
when you talk about what you're taught in teacher prep programs, you do, and I don't know if this is different in Canada, but here you do these lesson plans that are like 4 pages,
Yeah.
that have, they're all broken up, and then somebody
Yeah.
comes in and makes sure that you hit each of them, and they make corrections, and it just becomes this, hey, do you think you could tell me how to set up a grade book instead? But they, or teach me about building relationships instead. And in school, I think you see this interesting issue, because you can go into a school and you can tell the difference between teachers that are in education as a second career,
Yeah.
and teachers that have come right out of teacher prep programs in
Yeah.
school and right into the classroom.
Yeah.
The thing is with school, and some of the issues I find with school, is that um, it's not all a game, but there's a good amount of it that's a game. And if you're good at the way schooling is done, then you're successful, and that
That's
feels
right.
good, and that's okay. That you should feel good. You're confident. You've done that. So then when you come back into school, if you want to come into teaching, and you've never been out at another job in the private sector or anything like that, and you come right into school, well, you fall right into that niche or that game feeling of education because you were good at it.
That's right.
Well, unfortunately, being good at that particular game part of education has nothing to do with learning or relationships
Mm-hmm.
or understanding
Mm-hmm.
and building your skills. So
Mm-hmm.
I think as a leader, we have to realize that. And that, I mean, that speaks to the different types of teachers that we're looking at in our classrooms, in our hallways, because we do the same thing as leaders. I mean, you think about leaders that went from a teacher prep program into the classroom. They were good at that whole idea of school and schooling. And so then they come up into leadership, and they're used to the bureaucracy, they're used to the hierarchy. Um, Leaders today just have to break all of that down, and they have to take teachers where they are and have honest, authentic conversations with teachers that they have relationships with, to find out exactly where they are and to give them the support they need to step out of their comfort zone, get a little uncomfortable, because once they start seeing the improvement they have and the impact they have on students, there's no doubt in my mind that they will continue down that road. And there'll be hard times. This isn't all rainbows, skittles, and unicorns,
That's right.
um, but the impact that they see and the difference that they notice in the relationship aspect, which then success follows, they'll be thankful for those hard times afterwards.
Yeah, a lot of them I find are, what holds them back is the feeling of not wanting to disappoint, right?
Mm.
Like, they're so focused on the content, right? Like the curriculum, and I want to get them ready for the next grade, and then the next grade get them ready for the next, and they just lose themselves in that, right? They'll just concentrate so much on that they'll forget that, what about the relationship piece? What about the mental health piece? What about the connection piece? Which is really the most important thing. But often in my conversations, and having experienced it myself, you don't want to disappoint. You don't want to disappoint your students. You don't want to disappoint the parents. You don't want to disappoint your principal, because God forbid, if my principal comes in and we start talking, and then he realizes that I didn't have time to cover this aspect or this aspect of the curriculum, or the that's genuine feelings of doubt that they have, and I can understand that. So I think as leaders, like you were saying, it's up to us to bring that to the table and say, listen, I think the most important thing that we need to talk about is, maybe not as much curriculum as it is, your connections with the kids and getting them in that state to be able to learn.
You were talking about the idea of, I got to get them ready for the next grade, I got them ready for the test, and this and that and the other thing. I think it was, and let me bring this back to you saying about the podcasting and how we learn more from interviewing people and talking to people than we know. I was talking to, I believe it was John Whalen. I was talking to a few recordings back, where he said, why is it that we're always preparing students for more education instead of preparing them for the world and preparing them to be successful on their own based on the education that they get engaged with? Instead, we're always saying, when you get to the next grade, we're going to prepare you in elementary school. You got to be ready for middle school. And then middle school happens, and middle school says, oh, that big bad high school, you better be prepared for that. And then high school says one of two things. They say, we got to prepare you for university.
That's right.
Or they say to you, because you're unconventional, maybe you're a little outside the bounds or just pushing the edges, they say to you, man, you're going to be in trouble when you get into the real world. Well, so there's a different world of education than there is in the real world, and why wouldn't we be preparing them for the other? I don't know. I guess just the musings that keep me awake at night.
And we've been saying that for years, right? And I think it got to a point where some people do say it, and if you were actually to ask them, to explain it, exactly what that means, maybe they wouldn't even be in a position to be able to actually, explain, what it means. But I hear you definitely in this idea. It's funny because we've been having conversations this week with a support agent that's been accompanying our school board and the work that we're doing with our theories of action. And we actually spoke to that with the teachers, in his presentation. He spoke of that idea of getting them ready for university from high school to university. And the funny thing is that that expert that is actually helping us out is a university teacher. And he actually commented and said, listen, he said, in high school, you got your courses that are streamed. First of all, we're starting to de-stream in Ontario here, like, advanced general courses, and here in Ontario, Canada, when you get up to grade 11 and 12, you'll have your courses called the pre-university courses and the pre-collegiate courses, right? So, and he made the point, because teachers were saying, well, we got to get them ready for university. And the point that he made was this, he explained what he's been seeing coming into the universities, in terms of students. And he said, the students, it's not a question of getting them ready when it comes to the subject matter. He says, the biggest struggles that we're having with the kids coming in are those executive functions. We've got kids coming in, they don't know how to study. They don't know how to cope. They don't know how to organize. They don't know how to make a meal. And that is the biggest challenge that he is seeing within his university and his colleagues. So I think that was a big eye opener to everybody that's thinking, well, I got to shove, and I'm not saying curriculum is not important. It is important, but when are we talking about these executive functions, right? When are we talking about these important competencies that are actually going to follow you your whole life?
Right. And, it's the whole idea of curriculum. Curriculum is important. You're right. However, nobody can learn if they aren't in a place where they're able to learn. If they're not available to learn for whatever reason, whether it's a social emotional issue, a mental issue, a learning disability issue, or an organizational issue, or a coping issue, if they're not available to learn, they're not going to learn, no matter how much curriculum you do. And it's, we're doing this thing called Innovation Pathways at my school. And what we're doing is that puts in kind of vocational tracks where we look at regional blueprint of industry, what's needed, and entry-level jobs that are available for students. And we're trying to graduate students with entry-level credentials so they can step right into that. We were speaking with one of our biggest partners right now, and they said, you know what students need when they get here? if you want to give them a head start on 90% of the people that are going to be applying against them, they need people skills. They need interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
They can't talk to people. They can't relate to people. And you know,
Mm-hmm.
of course, I'm generalizing, and anytime you say all or every, you're wrong.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they said for the most part, these students that are coming out of school, they have things memorized. They have curriculum known, but they can't interact with people on the fly or have meaningful conversations with eye contact and different things like that. They said, you want to do everybody a favor or do them a favor, teach them that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we can be doing more of that. And I love, what you're talking about, the blueprint of, the businesses that are in your community and seeing what they need and seeing how we can partner up. And, we've got similar programs like that here in Ontario where we've got, credits that could be recognized both at the high school and at the collegiate level, before they go. So I think it's heading in the right direction, but it's not, obviously it's not going as fast as I'd like it to, but it's always like that, isn't it?
Right.
So listen, Chris, you talked about a little earlier, the importance as a leader to a company and to coach, the teachers that are in our school. And in your book, you talk about the learning cycle, right? And how everybody is at a different position within that learning cycle and how they all rotate at different speeds.
Right.
So, as a school administrator, and if you got a big school, it could be an even bigger challenge. So, how do you do it? How do you keep up with everybody that's at a different place in their learning cycle, but everything's in movement, everybody's rotating at different speeds. So, can you share with us some of the practices that you have that help you to be able to, to give your teachers what they need to help them to help push them to be even better?
Sure. I run and I delegate a lot and say no a lot. But no, I mean, that's a really good question. Out of all seriousness, I mean, you're right. When you're looking at how you support teachers, because you're always supporting teachers in one fashion or other, which is that piece of coaching. It does get easier as you move to that second level of engagement, and then you move to the ultimate, right, which is empowerment. And you have to have a certain amount of release as you move into empowerment, but then you just make sure and check in on them. And I think check in on them is the most important phrase in that whole thing. I don't buy into and you'll never be able to do this if you buy into the formal evaluation cycle and just stick with that.
Yeah.
I make small stops with all of them. Some of the ways I do that is I block off 2 sections a day in my calendar. So 2 hours a day.
Okay.
1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, where it's classroom walkthroughs. And so I walk through classrooms and I spend anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes in each classroom, 10 if they get me involved, which often they do.
They'll take advantage of it, eh?
Yeah. And so, well, I don't want to take too much time on the podcast, but I went into one, you could hear this on the feedback I gave to the teacher. He was going over some nuts and bolts in a history course about the industrial age. And some of the students were not engaged. Okay. And they're just kind of sitting there at the desk, glazing over a little bit. He's going through the PowerPoint, and then suddenly he stops. He realizes this. I'm sitting in the back of his room, and he whips out this poem he wrote that's a rap about the Industrial Revolution.
He wrote a rap about the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
I like that. that.
And so he says, you got to do this with me, though. He said, so I did this, so you got to do this with me to the students. And the students, 2 of them instantly turned around and said, we're in if Dr. Jones does it with us.
Really?
And so now I'm in a classroom rapping with students and a teacher about the industrial age.
So were you rapping, or were you like the beatbox guy there with the beat in the background?
No, he put it up on the screen. I didn't do the beatbox.
Okay.
I can do a little beatbox, but that's for another podcast, and it's very basic. Sounds it's limited to maybe 3 beats. But no, so so I go into these classrooms, and the hardest part I have is focusing on the students, right? To see who's engaged and things like that. And then how the teacher is adjusting to meet the level of engagement or access. And then when I leave them a Vox. I use Voxer. Now, for people who don't know what Voxer is, it's a walkie-talkie app. Beautiful thing about it is I can do it. None of the teachers have to join. It comes to them in a voice note. And so in my voice memo, I walk out of the classroom, I click that, I say, hey, so-and-so, I noticed that you were doing this, and this. Have you ever thought about this? And I always give them something for a little bit of improvement, a little tweak or something like that.
I think it's great. I've used Voxer as well myself, and it's an easy tool. It's free. Like you said, if they want to join, they just download, they put it on their phones, and I think it's a great app. So, if you guys aren't familiar with it, go download it and try it out with your staff. Sorry, Chris, keep going.
No, definitely try it. And so here's the beautiful thing about Voxer, right? Is that you don't have to dissect what I might have meant in a text or an email or anything like that.
Yeah.
You hear my voice. And there's a difference between, hey, Chris, I saw what you were doing in class, and that was really cool. I like that. And there's a difference between that and, hey, Chris, I saw what was going on in your class, and what was going on with that?
Yeah, exactly.
So, exactly. And I make it low stakes. So, and I worked it out with the union. I told them that, look, I'm going to do Voxer. Does it play into some of their evaluation? Of course, because everything does. However, if there's something wrong, if there's something really wrong, we're going to talk anyways, and then we're going to do something more formal. So it's low risk. They don't have to reply to it if they don't want, and I find that people reply to it. So that's one of the things I do to make sure that everybody's going where they need to go. The other thing I do is if I do notice something wrong, I'm very specific about how I address it.
Okay.
And this is kind of the coach part. I found that when supporting people, to keep them from closing down or getting defensive when you start bringing up the negative stuff, right? Because nobody likes to really hear that about themselves.
Yeah.
I depersonalize the negative things and I personalize the positive things. And so, by way of example, what I mean is if I see something wrong with their classroom management and the students could have gotten more out of the lesson if they managed their classroom better, I'll go to the person and I'll say, hey, Chris, I noticed that this was going on in your classroom. I don't know if you meant to have that happen or if you were really aware that was happening, but I noticed some other teachers have had success with this or have utilized this strategy, and it's worked well for them in that type of situation. So instantly the teacher goes, okay, well, he's giving me a suggestion based on something else he's seen after he said, he was asking me if I expected that to happen. So clearly that's something I need to shore up a little bit.
Yeah.
And then if I notice something goes well, like, hey, I noticed that check for understanding you did. And man, I don't know where you came up with that, but you did a fantastic job with that. And they're like, yeah, that's right. I did a really good job with that. And so they stay open during the conversation. And it's sometimes people might get a little confused and think that's kind of like sneaky or underhanded. It's not meant to be that at all. It's meant to help a person who's not quite there yet stay open enough to be able to receive some type of feedback where they can then correct their course.
That's right.
And so I make sure I do that. I have frequent check-ins with them, and the engagement part, I take pictures in classrooms, and you've seen that on social media. I take a lot of pictures in classrooms. Yeah. I put videos together, and I brag on them to get them engaged in what's going on, but it's always focused around what our school and our culture is about. And I make sure I put wording in there to do that. So now when a teacher starts to get engaged and I can see that they're getting engaged in what's going on, I make sure I do something like that, because the way you can engage somebody is, and I'll take the circuitous route to get to this, but we all got into teaching for a reason. And sometimes we stray away from that, and sometimes we stay super true to it that we don't want to hear anything else. But we have that why, and we have that vision for who we want to be as an educator.
Yeah.
I go out of my way to find ways that show how their personal vision or why for teaching, why they got into this whole thing to begin with, is connected to our school's vision and mission. Because then they see them as part of what's going on. And now if something bad happens, something negative happens, and they struggle, that's all right, because they're part of the larger community. And in that community, they find strength. They can lean on each other. They can say, hey, we're all in this together. Let's step it up. Let's work together. We got this. You've got this. And they know it's true because it matches that larger vision.
and they see themselves in it. I think that's fantastic. You know, you touched on a lot of stuff that I'd like to get into.
Sure. See, if you let me talk, I'll just ramble
No,
on.
I think it's great. I'm just absorbing this. I'm absorbing it. So you're absolutely right. You know, if we can, I love the approach and I totally agree with it. And it's what I would want. You know, if I'm part of an organization or a school or whatever it is, you know, I want to feel like I'm part of it. I don't want to feel like I'm just a piece and I'm not linked to anything else. I want to know that, and I want to feel that what I have to contribute is actually a positive contribution. So whenever, and you said it, and you know, at one point we all forget it or we all lose sight of it, and that's normal. We'll all have ups and downs as teachers, as principals, as fathers, as mothers. You know, it happens all over the place in our lives. But you know, to have to develop that culture within a school or within your family, that anchor that's able to ground you, and knowing that, you know, even if we do have those tougher days, you know, from what my family members are telling me, from what, you know, my principals telling me, my coworkers, my colleagues at school are telling me, it's all reminders that no, you're a part of this chain, and we're all, you know, we're all in this together. So yeah, there's going to be some bumps in the road, but it doesn't matter, because you know, you still have a lot of positive to contribute, and we need you. So to be able to develop that sense of belonging, also, I think, also develops within the person a sense of accountability and ownership, right? So they're going to want to, you know, what I was saying before about, you know, being afraid to disappoint. Sometimes it's not good, but sometimes it's really good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm so happy that, you know, I know my kids, my daughter's sitting just right over there and she's doing some homework and she's got her earbuds on. So as usual, she's not going to hear any of this, but
I was going to say, tell her I said hi.
Yeah. But, you know, for them to have developed, you know, for them, when it comes to their parents, you know, they don't want to disappoint. And I think that's okay, right? Because there's a high standard and you want to make sure that, you know, that you're living up to that high standard. So in a team, I think that's really important. But having that connection piece, it just gives you that extra oomph that you need, that, you know what, you know, I have a purpose here. There's a reason why I'm here, and what I'm doing makes a difference. So because of that, I'll be even more engaged. I'll engage with my colleagues. I'll engage with my students, and it'll just give you, you know, that much more that you're able to bite into, you know, within your learning environment. So I think that's absolutely fantastic.
So well said. You know, and it's funny as you're talking about it. I even have a couple more things that you know, because sometimes we get in our own way, right?
Yep.
And we lose sight because of things we're doing. So two really useful tools that I used to help, that I used and I continue to use, that help me stay on point, is one, I schedule a 15-minute meeting with every teacher in my building at the middle of the year.
Yeah.
And they get a chance to evaluate me. So now I ask them, what am I doing that I need to stop doing? In other words, what's not working for you? What am I doing that I need to continue doing? What is working for you? And what's something you need right now? And I've gotten everything from, gee, Chris, I could really use a new set of books, to, hey, I just really want like a box of magnetic poetry that I use, because I have one box, but I don't have enough for all the students to run a certain activity in class.
Yeah.
I mean, that's low hanging fruit, and that gets them engaged in what's going on, and they feel like they're supported. So I take all that information, and I have to say, I use surveys too for all kinds of different things, but I very loudly and publicly use every survey that I get. Okay. I never ask for information and have people wondering whatever happened to that.
Yeah, no, you don't want that.
Right. I come forward and I say, look, I'm using this survey. This is a survey that you filled out or whatever. Yeah. The next thing I did is, we all have a vision of who we are, who we want to be. I asked my staff, and I have that as me as a leader. I asked my staff to take some time and give 3 words. I did a mentee word cloud with it.
Yeah.
3 words that you would use to describe me as a leader. If somebody asked you adjectives, like, well, you're describing Dr. Jones as your principal, go 3 words.
Yeah.
And that built that word cloud. Now it's like a regular word cloud where the most hit word is the biggest, and you know, all that. And I got that word cloud and I printed it out, and it was telling. And I printed it out and I put that right next to my desk. So whenever I I'm flustered. I'm making a quick decision. I feel like I'm making a mistake. I'm unsure. All those things that happen to us every day. I look at that word cloud because that's who those teachers see me as. Those are the adjectives that describe me. Am I acting with integrity? Am I listening? Am I being supportive? Am I being empathetic? It's a trigger to help me get back to where I need to be, where I can be my best self in that moment to make the best decision possible. And so my advice to leaders is anytime you can get a tool from somebody else's input that describes where you are, where you need to be, and you can keep it where you can, and you can get it tangible so you can remind yourself, because we're not thinking about how purposeful we're being or building our character when, man, that parent called 3 times, then went to the superintendent, and now the superintendent's mad, or the school committee member saw this and they're upset, or that teacher failed 5 kids again for no reason you can understand, and you want to make those decisions and everything's flying because you have 3 other discipline incidents going on. If you just stop and you look, most of the time, 95% of the time, you're going to make the right call.
Yeah. And you got people, you're surrounded with people that are going to help you, do that.
Right.
And so the feedback piece is really important. I think it's not only important to develop that confident school culture, right? And that culture that, that shows to people that you can be honest, and I'm looking for an honest answer. I'm not telling you to insult me in the word cloud, but I want you to be honest, so if you think that I'm not communicating enough, well, then write it, because I need to know, right? And this is a great way to do it because it's anonymous. So if you got some teachers that are still not, comfortable to want to say it and be known who said what, then that's a great way to do it, right? And then the fact that you're using it and putting it right, beside your desk, and you're talking about it, like you said, that just builds credibility, right? It just shows the people that you're listening, and we need to be listening, because we don't see each other. We don't see ourselves go. You just gave an example of the parent that calls, or, the 15 students that you had referred to the office that day, or, or even ourselves, we'll get all excited. We're presenting something, a piece on leadership at a staff meeting or at a PD day, and we're not noticing that people aren't engaged, but we're so excited about it. So there's different and a whole bunch of different opportunities where, as principals and as teachers, where we're engaged and we're maybe not, conscious of what's going on around us. So what a great tool to use as an administrator. But for those of you that are listening to this episode, if you are a classroom teacher as well, what a great tool to use with your students.
Yeah, that would work great with students. And the black belt move for that, when you talked about anonymous, right? So take that next step. I stopped, that word cloud is anonymous. I stopped doing anonymous surveys in my building.
Yeah.
And I explained to staff, because communication is important. I explained to staff that I want them to be empowered. I'm not interested in being right. I'm interested in the right answer. And so quite often that's not going to come from me, just because I've got my perspective and my viewpoint from, 30,000 feet up, or whatever you want to call it. So I don't always know what's going on. And that took some time to build that culture, to be able to say that, and to get people to fill out the survey. The percentage, when you first do that, the percentage of the people that fill out the survey really drops when they got to put their name on it.
You'll know who's gonna send it in and who probably won't, but that's
right.
I think that's normal.
Yeah. And so with my leadership team, it took me a while to do that, where our leadership team meetings, boy, we have some exciting meetings together where we go back and forth, and we all leave and we're good with each other, because they know I'm not going to hold that against them. Obviously, you're always respectful, and you're not doing hateful things, but just professional, and being professional means that you're going to do the best you can. And the whole idea, when you think about, I'm a pro, the whole idea is to get to the right answer. And so I expect them to push back and give me pushback on things like that. But it's really about the idea of people speaking up. And for the empowerment piece, when people email me or ask me something, quite often I've been known to respond, don't ask me about that if you can do that. Email me after telling me you did that. Yeah. And if I have a question, I'll ask you your question, but don't come to me. And that's how you really begin to empower teachers, is those little steps. And you have them do things and then tell you, have them do things and then tell you, and then bigger things. And then you'll, with all the engagement piece about their why, the support, you understand where they are, you understand just how big of a thing you can hand over to them that will stretch them, and they may fall down a little bit, but you empower them.
Yeah.
And now they really take off,
Yeah.
as long as you support them after they're done with that piece.
And you said it, and to do that it takes time. We can't, and
Right.
often as administrators we're excited, we want to move forward, but we can't forget that if we're going too fast and we're not looking back, at some point we're going to turn around and we're going to say, wow, there isn't anybody there anymore. So
Right,
then
right.
what are you going to do, right? But it's trust is not given, right? Trust is earned. And that's a really important piece. So, and you said it, you went from those surveys, those anonymous surveys, to not anonymous surveys anymore. And you said it takes time, it takes work, and it takes the systems to put into place to build that trust within the staff. And I was just looking on Amazon, because I know Pat Lencioni's got some great books on how to be able to put systems into place. And we're actually like a Pat Lencioni school. We have the school board, where I work at today. So, but building that trust, it doesn't come overnight, and you got to work at it. And once you reach that level where I can get a lot of the people to start answering surveys, which are not anonymous, your work ain't done, because you that trust, you're working at it all the time. Things are going to happen. Things are going to be said. But what we're trying to do is develop that culture where, you said it in your leadership meetings, you can have some really, I'm not going to say heated, you can have some really intense, discussions on instruction and on pedagogy, and in French, pédagogie, and and it can be very intense. But when you've developed that culture and that trust, that you can say real things to each other, but you also know that you're not going to take it personally, right? And that makes me think of a little bit your approach with giving feedback to teachers, with Voxer. And I agree with that, because what you're actually doing is that you're making them realize that it's not about them as a person. It's about the strategy. It's about the approach. That's what it's about. It's about the process, right?
Right.
And it's hard to take. You said it. It's hard to take. Those comments, and in intense discussion like that, it can be hard to take it, because it's very personal, right? Teaching and pedagogy is very, very personal. So when you got somebody coming in and giving you pointers, you're like, who is this person there? What are they talking about? So, to get over that hump, it takes time, and it's the trust that you got to build.
Yeah. And, and once you get that trust and you approach it, I mean, trust me, it works. I remember giving feedback to a teacher, and this teacher had handed out some worksheets that and it was almost like a guided note worksheet type of thing and she was working through a concept. And when I left, I gave the feedback on Voxer and everything. And then the twist was, is there another way to get kids more involved than a sheet? Is there a better way to approach this concept than this? Because I watched someone filling out the sheet, and it's like going through the motions. So what are they really? They're not engaging in the learning. They're doing it, but they're not engaging in learning.
Yeah.
And I would have never thought this from this individual. I got an email back that said, thanks for coming into class, this, that, the other thing. And thank you for pointing that out. You're right. I've been using that for quite a few years, and I just got really comfortable with using it. And I should probably look at a different way of doing that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I walked out of the building, a little high off the ground that day, feeling pretty good about it. But
absolutely,
it's amazing when you build that trust and you get that idea of, I mean you no harm. I'm going to work with you. I'm going to support you. And I remember when I was going through the interview for this job, the union president was on the interview committee. The union president said, so talk to me about corrective action on teachers.
Okay.
And talk to me about how you go about dealing with teachers that are underperforming.
Okay.
And I said,
great question.
Oh, fantastic question. I said, well, okay, so a couple of things before I answer this question. And I let off with, I said, I don't deal with teachers that are underperforming. I work with teachers that are underperforming. And I said, also, we're all in the business of education. Do we throw students out because they're not doing that well? Or do we work with them to help them bolster their skills? And I always say this, no teacher, no teacher ever gets up in the morning, gets ready for work, knowing what's waiting for them, maybe being planned through fourth period, but really hoping for that prep fifth period so they can get ready for sixth period.
Yeah.
Because they have papers to correct and all this, comes into work and walks in their door and says, you know what? I'm going to suck today.
Yeah.
I just want to really do bad today. We're all, and we talk about this with kids, right? We say, if they could do better, they would, when we talk about academics and when we talk about behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we saying that with teachers?
Mm.
Why aren't we saying, look, if a teacher could do better, they would? And now, whether that's the teacher with the attitude that says, I know what I'm doing and I'm not going to change, I haven't changed in 20 years. Okay. But they still don't realize, quite possibly they don't realize, because they've been doing it for 20 years, what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do. And it's not them. It's the darn kids. It's the parents. It's society. It's a different way to do it, but you just can't see it. And so as a leader, as an instructional leader, as a coach, that's my job, to help them see that so that they can adjust and improve their practice. My job's not to kick them off the field or say, you're no longer welcome here.
Yeah.
No, that's not to say that, as things move along, if there are people that don't improve. And so something has to happen, because ultimately the kids need to have somebody in front of them that helps them succeed to their highest level. And teaching is a difficult profession,
mm-hmm.
and it's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to have that conversation.
Yeah.
That maybe this isn't for them.
Yeah.
But
and it might happen, within a principal's career, one or two times, maybe. And like you said, it isn't an easy profession, definitely. And there are other professions as well that aren't easy as well. But to have the conversations, and sometimes, it could be the best thing, and it could be what that person needs, is to have that conversation, because I was going to say, maybe they're not realizing it, but they can feel it. They can feel it, that it's not working. But a lot of teachers will feel stuck. What else am I going to do? I've been building this pension for X amount of years, so they'll have all these questions, and often they're stuck in a rut. But often they won't be in movement, or they'll be frozen because they don't know what to do to get out of it, right? So what else would I do? So that's, some of the questions that they ask. But coming back to your example with the worksheet, I think that's a great example and a great segue to my next question, coming from the book. I've had those situations as well, where we're using strategies that we've been, we're still using strategies that we've been using for many years, but often because we don't realize it, or often because it's not because they don't work. They work, the kids get their work done, but I think it has a lot to do with, sometimes, with control, right? And when it comes down to, it's not me, it's the kids. First of all, it's not easy to have to look at yourself in the mirror when it comes down to those things. But what I always say in those situations is, okay, if I'm a classroom teacher in front of kids, what is the number one thing that's in my control, that's in my zone of influence? That's how I act and what I do in the teaching that I do. So that should be the first place that I need to look at. If I've got kids that are being disruptive, for example, or I've got kids that aren't engaged, well, I'm not saying that you're not going to go and to the student and talk to them and try to find out what's going on, but you should at least also be looking at, okay, why is it that they're not engaged? Because, whenever they're acting up, there's always a reason for it, right? So maybe one of the reasons is because they're bored. Maybe they're not engaged. Maybe I'm doing too much of, frontal teaching and not enough of explicit teaching, and doing some modeling and letting them work in groups and things like that, and changing it up. So often it's a control piece, right? And it's not easy to let go of that control. And in the book, you talked about that, right? When we're talking about accompanying teachers and empowering teachers to grow and build confidence. Now, you talked about at some point where you said, I got to let go of some of this control for this to take place. So,
yeah.
what does that look like? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I can sum it up with one phrase, but then I'll use an example. So,
Okay.
the one phrase, you give a teacher something to do or somebody something to do, and I joked about this at the beginning, the whole idea of delegating, but you give a teacher something to do because you empower them to take
Yeah.
that next step,
Yeah.
and then they do it. And now if it's a planned empowerment where you want to stretch them a little bit, they're going to fail. That's the whole idea, right? But they're going to do the best they can to get a taste of where they're at, and then you support them. The worst thing you can do is say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, so it's not as good as it could have been.
Mm.
You have to, if you're going to truly empower somebody, you have to step out of the equation. It's that release piece, because at the lowest level of release, you're still controlling, but as you work into letting them go and truly letting them go, the highest level of release is just where you start to empower people,
Yeah.
because you truly have to let go. So if you give somebody a project, what you want to do is check in on them every once in a while, because then you want to make sure that they have a plan, because you want to try and help them be as successful as they can without taking over. And so you just say, so, okay, Chris, where are you on this or this? And Chris says, well, I've got this, but I've emailed this person, they haven't emailed back. And you check, you say, look, is there something I can help you with, or have you thought about approaching it this way?
Yeah.
You just give them little pointers as they go along. And when they're done with the project, say it was an event, and the event went off pretty good. It could have been better. Maybe, some of the people that would have sponsored didn't sponsor. Maybe you didn't have as high of a showing with staff as you wanted to, or maybe the kids weren't as invested. Maybe you didn't make as much money if it was a fundraiser, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The first thing you need to do is celebrate the success of it, and let that person know, wow, this is the first time you did that. That's Chris, you did a really good job with that. I mean, think of, you made this much money, or wow, you got 12 staff to show up and work all the hours, not just in shifts because they didn't really want to be there or they weren't invested. Hey, I heard the kids had a lot of fun. You want to start with that and celebrate the success, and immediately you want them to own it by saying, so Chris, next time you do this, let's talk about how it's better. Let's take a step away for a day, 2 days. Let's sit down and meet, gather your thoughts, reflect on it a little bit, and then let's sit down and think about the next time you do this, because now they're going, oh, there's the next time I'm doing this. The next time you do this, we want to make sure that you improve, right? Because improvement comes one step at a time. It's not overnight. So the next time you do this, you're automatically going to be better. And so now, not only have they owned it, saying, okay, this is my baby now, so I have to pay attention to what happened, and I learned, and I did a good job, but I can improve a little bit, because so now you're talking about the continuous improvement piece. And now when they come back and they reflect on it, now you're talking about the accountability piece, because you've planted the seed that next time you do it, it's going to be better. You weren't 100%, you didn't knock it out of the park. Maybe I could have, maybe Joe next door could have, but it's on you. So you're the one that needs to make it what it can be. And you start to vision board what that could be. And so now they're already accountable because they've owned it. And they are basically telling you by sitting down with you that, yeah, I'm going to make this better next year. I'm going to close up all these loops. But the worst thing you can ever do is say, I would have done it this way. Because then why did you even empower them?
Yeah.
Or even on smaller things, if they do something and then and I've seen leaders do this is so frustrating. Then you undo it and you redo it the way you wanted it. Or, you take over halfway through and you do it the way you wanted it. And it's like, what? You just demolished
absolutely
any thought that person ever has of stepping forward again.
Yeah. And trust.
And there's that word again.
And trust. No, you're right. And it's to develop that mindset that we're always on the quest of getting better in everything that we're doing, and everything in life. I truly believe that's really that's my mission anyways in life, is how can I make it better? And it doesn't come from a place where I'm saying it wasn't good enough. And I think that's the difference when you're having conversations like the example you just gave. When we're talking about things like that, you know, it's important to come up with the celebration, the celebrate piece. I absolutely agree, because it's about building. It's not about demolishing what you've done. So that's an important part, because again, it's very personal. So somebody that's been, let's say, that's been organizing an event for years, and you know that teacher that always does that same activity, and and it's big and they do a great job. But when you sit down with them and you say, well, okay, listen, this was fantastic, had a great turnout. Now, how can we do it, make it even better next year? So, you know, it's not about, you know, I'm not saying that what you did wasn't good enough. It's never about being good enough. It's always about bringing it even further, bringing it and improving and making it better. So, and that's an important mindset, I think, to develop in our staff and within ourselves. And we have to be talking about it all the time. We got to bring that, you know, on the table within everything that we're doing, within the language that we're speaking with the teachers and with the students. And once we get to that mindset, those conversations become even easier to have.
Well, and when you reflect on where you've come from, right? Because, and it's important for the leader to model that first, and to get up
Yeah.
in front of your people and say, you know, I was going to do this, and I know I did this last year, but then I got to thinking, how could I make this work better for you?
Yeah.
How could I make this work better for the students? So because of that, I'm going to be doing this.
Yeah.
And so I mean, you start those conversations. However, sometimes because of mindset, and this is knowing your people, that's difficult for people.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, because I'm always talking about continuously improving, and not because, like you said it fantastic, not because you're not good where you are, but if you just improved a little, think about how much better you could be.
Yeah.
And I got feedback from a teacher that, you know, continuous improvement, I just always feel like I'm not getting any better and it's not good enough. And I always have to keep improving because I'm just not good enough. So I met with that teacher, and the benefit of non-anonymous surveys. And I met with that teacher and I said, okay, look, let's just take a step back. Forget about continuous improvement right now, just for a second. Let's just take a step back and talk about where you are now. And this was a longer one-to-one, heart-to-heart type meeting.
Yeah.
And the teacher explained to me, you know, where they were, some of the things they were doing. And I, you know, I asked them different things like, so what do you do to, you know, get the kids fired up? What special unit did you just teach? What's this? What's that? And the teacher was talking. I said, now let me ask you something. And this might be a little more difficult. What's the best unit you were teaching a year ago? What's the most exciting thing you were doing for students a year ago? How involved or how well did you know your students a year ago? And looking back at it, the year ago was nowhere near as good as the current. And I said, now look at that gap in your performance, because you've just been taking little step at a time, little step at a time, little step at a time. So you get a free pass, a golden ticket for the next month. Just hold status quo. And then month and a half after this, why don't you look at, what can I tweak? What step can I take forward? What's the next unit coming up, and I can adjust a little bit.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you just need to take that step back so people don't get too overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because like you were saying, I get all jazzed up about it. I'm like, one more step, one more tweak, one more this. And, you know, I gotta, okay, Jones, slow down a little bit, you know?
I hear you. I hear you. And it's funny because James Clear talks about that in his book, Atomic Habits. And he talks about, you know, how you're looking to be just 1% better each day. I'm not asking 25. I'm not 1%, because when you do the math, you know, and for example, if I take today, well, today I performed and I was myself at 100%. It represents 100%. Now tomorrow, if I'm even better, if I'm 1% better than that, then that becomes 101%. But if I'm 1% not as good as, or not a better version of what I was, then I go down to 99%. So if you do the math day in and day out, you finish with this curve that goes, I forget the name of it, but it spikes up at one point. So there's always this point in the curve where I think he calls it the valley of disappointment or something like that, where we're not seeing the change because it's those micro habits, right? And it's that slow improvement, you know, and when we're in it, we don't always see it. So that's why, you know, the beauty of having, you know, administrators that are engaged, that are going into classrooms, having colleagues, having leaders, teacher leaders, instructional leaders coming in and, you know, that outside looking in, they're able to tell us, you know, well, you might think this, but guess what? This is what I seen, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And you might not be seeing that increment of 1% every day, but every day you've been, for the last month, you've been doing 101%.
Yeah.
And that adds up when you do the math at the end of the month,
My assistant principal says something to the freshmen every year at freshman orientation.
Okay.
And I love this line because it's right in line with what I believe in. He said, and I call it maximum effort, what you're describing.
Okay.
And he says this line to freshmen. He says, look, every day you come in here, I'm not saying you need to be the best. I'm saying you need to be your best. Your best that you've got might be 80% of somebody else's best. Yep. But it doesn't matter because that's what you've got, and you've got to come in with your best. And eventually you'll be up at that 100% with everybody else if you come in at your best every day. So it's really about, that 1% better. We're all at different spots. And there's a reason that some people are ultra successful in life and other people have a burst and then they're not.
Yeah.
And it's all about getting on it, staying on it, and putting forth your maximum effort, your personal maximum effort. I tell my boys all the time, I say, look, if you're going to try something, give your maximum effort or don't bother trying it. And I said that the tricky thing about that is it's about who you are as a person. It's about your character, because there's only one person in the world that knows if you're putting forth your maximum effort, if that's all you've got. And that person is the person you have to live with.
Yeah.
Nobody else.
Yeah.
So I think that's important for leaders to get across to those they serve, is that you need to put in your maximum effort, your 100% every day, and just push a little harder. And I mean, I do little concrete things, or people do concrete things that they don't even realize they're practicing this. They're putting this in practice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Teachers get near the end of their summer break. 2 weeks before they have to go back to school, they start setting their alarm clock earlier.
Yep. Yeah.
What do you think that is? That's increasing. That's improving a percentage every day. Do you get where you need to be? Absolutely. Or where you want to be?
Absolutely.
And they don't even realize that that's what they're doing. And if you can translate something simple, something so basic as that, so ingrained as a habit, into your practices and into their practices, man, we're going to talk about those. We're going to see those changes we were talking about that we need to see in education. Absolutely. We're preparing students for life to be successful instead of the next level.
Exactly. And always compare you to you. Don't compare yourself to others, because that's a dangerous game. It's like a game of golf. You play against yourself. That's what
I stay away from that game.
So listen, Chris, it's been a great conversation. And once again, Seeing to Lead, Support, Engage, and Empower. What a fantastic book. Available on Amazon. Also available, I believe, on the Codebreaker website, right? Codebreakeredu.com, I believe. It's available there. So I will link this up to the show notes. Okay. So if people listening, you got to get this book. It is awesome. The stories are great. It comes from the heart. Chris, you did a great job with the book. So to get the link, just head on out to inspireleadership.ca in the podcast section. Chris will have his own page, and we'll have a few show notes there, and we'll link that up there. So click it and order the book.
I have, if you want, and if it's any easier to remember, once they go to your show, seeingtolead.com, just the title of the book.com, brings you to a page with the book where you can order from there. Perfect. As well.
Perfect. I will link that up as well to the website. So once again, everybody head on down to inspireleadership.ca, and the podcast section will get all that in there so that you can get your hands on a copy of Chris's book, Seeing to Lead, Support, Engage, and Empower. So, Chris, it's been a great conversation. I got one question left for you. Really appreciate the time you've spent with me on this. What is it, Wednesday today?
It is. Yes, Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday.
I had to stop and think about it.
Just had to check on this Wednesday evening. So, listen, Chris, for the people that are listening to us, what would be the one wish that you would have for them?
The one wish that I would have for people. Be true to yourself and put the work in day after day to make sure you're truly serving others to help them reach their own personal level of success. Because if you do that, there's no way you aren't successful.
That's awesome. And it all comes down to what your book says, right? It's support, engage, and empower. That is
There
what
you
it's all
go.
about. And the nice thing about it is that it just doesn't just apply to a school setting. When I think about even raising my children,
Yeah.
working, fostering, relationships. You want to support, engage, and empower. It's the same thing. So I think it's great, Chris. Thank you very much once again for being my guest on the podcast. It's been great connecting with you. Love the work that you're doing. Love following you on in social media, and maybe we can do this again.
Oh, pleasure's mine. I'd love to. I have a great time talking to you all the time, and I really continue to learn from you, and I wish you all the best.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris.